Guys, I have a problem with this build. And no, the problem is not making, testing, and creating my latest and greatest pure Ice Shard build that so many of you have requested. The problem is, what I have ended up with is so good that I don't know how I'm going to convey just how effective this setup and playstyle is when done in this way, because this is not just your regular spam Ice Shards at enemies, though you will be spamming Ice Shards at enemies. This results in an endless chain of freezing explosions that reacts all around you, almost passively just cleaving through every enemy on screen, and you don't really have to think about it. Imagine if your character had a permanent aura that meant every time an enemy appeared anywhere near you, they got instantly frozen and then one hit detonated. And when that happened, they then instantly froze, and then instantly detonated every enemy near them, and then so on and so forth. While this entire time, you only need to shoot a single enemy and watch the frosty fireworks happen, while being unkillable with infinite massive barriers, and never running out of mana in the slightest. This kinda feels unfair, and while you do trade off a bit of damage potential to make this happen, if we look at overall accounting for ease of use for survivability on a class that, let's be honest guys, desperately needs more survivability, I think, at least in my experience, this is the most comfortable, easiest, and although my heart belongs to our clash, best sorcerer build I've played. So, hello, my fellow sorcerers. I realize that was, quite the setup here. But let me put this to you in more kinda definitive terms. A frozen enemy takes bonus damage from Ice Shards. They take bonus damage in general, a lot of it. They then get hit with the Ice Shard Enchantment. They will then freeze other nearby enemies and make nearby enemies vulnerable. Then they will detonate when the freeze ends or they die, killing everyone around them. They will also give you a huge endless barrier, which is mana and more damage, and then perhaps most importantly, a frozen CC'd enemy can't hurt you, which makes it amazing for pushing Height Nightmare dungeons. To prove that point, this one is like, 22, 24 levels above me, which, isn't crazy, until I let you in on the fact that this sigil had 60% reduced damage from range. So, yeah, enemies took a lot of killing, but even so, you can see how easily and effortlessly this controls and destroys everything. It's not just a case of pure damage, it's a case of mass, endless, screen-wide CC in the form of blanket freezing in perpetuity that then also results in everything frozen just dying. It's so good and so much fun, and I cannot recommend this enough. So knowing that a frozen enemy is that beneficial to you, wouldn't it be great if every enemy was frozen all of the time? Well, yes, it would be, and yes, it is, because that is what this build achieves. And as a final little note before we get to the details, ultimately Ice Shards is a ranged attack, and even with that, we still Raiment Teleport, we Frost Nova, we shoot it at point blank, and that's really effective. That leads to colossal amounts of damage. But it would be nice to use, the ranged spell at ranged, and have just as good, or dare I say, better results. And that is what this lets you do. This one guy here, I start blasting with Ice Shards, and simply because I have done that, it leads to an unstoppable chain reaction that kills every enemy behind him that I can't even see yet because they're not on my screen. That is so cool. Because of the ice? I'm so sorry. The skill tree is, as usual, where we begin. Let's start actually putting this together then. We want our initial 2 ranks in Firebolt, just to get the enchantment for the burning synergies that you know we're going to be using, and then 2 points to get us to the core of the build, because it's like a core skill, and also Ice Shards, all 5 ranks get put into that, and then enhance them, so we can then get to Destructive, so we can have ranged, consistent, vulnerable. This is very important. Then we want to amp our maximum mana, as we want as much mana above 100 as we can get. Then we want Elemental Dominance for, again, free 9% damage, as 90% of our Ice Shards will be cast above 50 mana. In fact, probably more. Over to the defensives then, where as usual, our answer to which one to take is simply yes. Flame Shield up to Shimmering for that emergency heal button. Teleport to, well, bunch up with Raiment and just get that rolling damage reduction, and for the sheer travel speed of it, the extra damage from Glass Cannon, as it's free, as trust me, in this build, you're just so hard to kill. Ice Armor for the extra barrier synergy uptime, and just for an extra emergency button, it might as well be here. And then Frost Nova, because despite us having a lot of ranged power and this build doing so well at range, the fact is, the teleport in and Frost Nova is still insanely effective, and we want extra ways to get vulnerable rolling from both the enhanced and then the mystical. Only 1 rank of elemental attunement so that we can get resets on our defensives. Our lucky hits are going to be sky high in this build, so this happens constantly every 10 seconds, even with that. So, down we go to get even more Lucky Hits, as Lucky Hits powers everything here, as I alluded to just now, and then we get 1 Align the Elements to get to full Mana Shield, so this will be up permanently, and then full Protection for more barrier uptime and synergy from spamming all of our defensive. Though you will be spamming them a lot less in this way of Ice Sharding, as you do play it ranged a lot, versus Arc Lash or traditional Ice Shards. Then we go down and grab Simply Devouring Blaze for that love. Then we go down here and get just all of the Frost and Ice and Chill passives, as they all do a lot for us. Just 20% more damage to elites, or 15 if you don't have the extra rank like I do, an extra 12% damage to vulnerable, which enemies always will be from both Frost Nova and Ice Shards itself, and then this, which is one of our main sources of infinite mana, the lucky hit chance to generate mana against vulnerable enemies. This is just always happening. And then Hoarfrost for increased damage to frozen enemies, one of the key reasons why we want enemies to be permanently frozen. Then for our ultimate, we grab Inferno with just the pull. This just gives us an extra way to control the battlefield, to group everyone up, to pierce through them all with Ice Shards. It's just nice to have, but it's more an emergency than it is something we want to focus on. And then we head down to our key passive, and as I alluded to, this is a Shatter version of Ice Shards. We have given up Avalanche. The reason for that is, A, we don't need the mana help, and then the 40% increased damage is less damage gain than the constant explosive pops of Shatter when clearing a dungeon. Obviously, against pure single target or bosses, then Avalanche is actually better, and if you can be bothered before you walk into a boss, just kind of do this, and then you're good. You don't have to. Our boss damage is still utterly ridiculous, and you will shred through them, but hey, that's the pure min-max way to approach this. But yeah, Shatter really takes advantage of, and is one of the key reasons why we have lent in to this idea of just permanently freezing every enemy on screen all of the time, because then all of them will explode with Shatter, and it just cleaves and chains through the map, and it is delightful. The The amount of just passive you'll kill stuff because of Shatter is so satisfying. So when we come to our enchantment slots, there's no real choice at all. For an Ice Shard build, we need the Firebolt for the Devouring Blaze and the Burning Paragon board, and then we want the Ice Shards enchantment for the free flunging Ice Shards at frozen enemies. And again, because we are playing into this every enemy frozen all of the time, this is just perpetually going off, and the amount of free kills you get is silly. Remember that we have Shatter and this, so if an enemy gets frozen, it gets killed passively by this enchantment, then explodes with Shatter, killing everyone around it, and if it doesn't kill them, it will then freeze them, causing Ice Shards to fly again, and you see how it just repeats the process on and on until there's no enemies left standing. Why them shattering freezes everyone else, we will get to later on. So this is your setup as you imagine, and normally with Ice Shards you would teleport, Frost Nova, dash out, and then power the shards through, but while that's still plenty powerful, viable, and something you should do in the right situation, honestly, the best way to play this, if you're pushing and the key is high, well, you just get to the point that the enemies are at the edge of your screen, and then you simply let fly, and then you'll start this chain reaction going, where everyone just kind of dies for daring to vaguely be near you. It is delightful. The Serpent is there to coil and get the extra pull through. The Fire Shield, just an extra defensive for if things are getting a little bit hairy. Same with Ice Shield, and then Teleport, honestly, you can use as getting around quicker as much as you can use it for pulling in and doing the stun pile. It is nice to shift Ice Shards to this more I can actually use it for its massive range. So let's talk legendary aspects then. We want the Ice Shards Piercing. This is mandatory for an Ice Shard build, affects both your cast and the enchantment. It's just glorious. Then we want to have your Core Mastery skills of higher crit chance when cast above 100 mana. The amount of mana regen you have in this build means that this is pretty much going to be every cast. And I'm not joking, I have 177 mana and it only costs 21, which means I can shoot for a fair while just in general, but only now am I dipped underneath that threshold. It really is quite wonderful. Then we want to have increased vulnerable damage. While we have a barrier, we'll be making things vulnerable with both Ice Shards and Frost Nova, and we'll be having a barrier all the time. This is a huge amp to the vulnerable bucket, which is the single largest amp you can get. Then we have critical strikes with your core skills. We're critting all the time. Gives you attack speed. This is what lets us really start machine gunning out those Ice Shards. On our necklace then, as you might imagine, we have control to do more damage to stunned, frozen, and immobilized enemies. Enemies are always going to be frozen and sometimes also stunned, so this really stacks up. On our boots then, we have the lucky hit chance with a barrier, always barrier, huge amp to lucky hit. Lucky hits is what makes this entire way of playing work, and not just for mana regen. Then we have Raiment of the Infinite for that teleport stun. It's still amazing no matter what kind of sorcerer you're playing, and still incredibly worthwhile. Though I would say that out of every build I've presented, you could probably have this one as the one you could get away with the most not having it, but still, really do have it. Then we are left with the 3 bits of gear that make this all tick. Firstly, on our helmet then, we have Shared Misery. Lucky hit chance to spread the crowd control when you hit a crowd-controlled enemy. This is what makes the freeze chain to everything on screen so instantly. I cannot express how quickly this takes effect. Like this example here where I start attacking just this elite, and then if you look at the wave coming in from the top, all of them just get frozen back to back to back that rapidly. And then the Ice Shard enchantment takes over. It's so good. But the thing is, we need a way to freeze enemies at range without Frost Nova if we're going to freeze them with Ice Shards, which doesn't do inherent chill. Enter Frostburn. This gives us a lucky hit, a sizable one, to freeze enemies for 2 seconds. So this freezes the enemy you've attacked with Ice Shards, which then causes that enemy to spread the frost, And you see how this is layering up. The third layer then is Iceheart Brais, the unique legs. Enemies that die while frozen have a chance to unleash a Frost Nova. And both of these have increased freeze duration and give you extra damage to frozen enemies. So this means that our enemies that do get frozen, and you'll have been noticing it in the various bits of dungeon clear you've seen, they really do stay frozen for so long. Like, it's ridiculous how much they just have to stand there and get killed by you. A frozen enemy is a dead enemy, and these two, complete with the helmet, means everyone is frozen all of the time. So to really play out what's happening here, you hit an enemy, Frostburn freezes them. You hit that frozen enemy, Shared Misery freezes all the other enemies. That frozen enemy dies, popping a Frost Nova, making everyone around them vulnerable and re-freezing them. The freeze is lasting longer and making them take much more damage thanks to these two and aspect of control and everything else we've got going on. Then that frozen enemy will unfreeze or die, unleashing Shatter, which will then kill everything around it. And then, to jump ahead to Paragon, we of course have in this setup Icefall, which is giving us a barrier every time a frozen enemy dies. Nearly every enemy that dies to this build is frozen. So you see how tanky it is, and that is the reason why we can use Iceheart Brais and not a legs for defensive emphasis along with disobedience, etc. So we have so many layers that build up, that take advantage of and require freeze, that create this frosty feedback loop that you're seeing how effective it is, and it's what lets you actually play properly at ranged and just kinda kill everyone. Not to mention that, of course, you are also then perpetually throwing out your ice shards at all of these frozen enemies that are perpetually staying frozen. This is why you can just shoot at the one enemy on screen you can see, and then it will kill everyone behind them because they're now all getting frozen, all shattering, all getting Ice Shard enchanted, and all chain frost novering each other, all becoming vulnerable, and it really is amazing. And I was actually blown away when I first did my initial test putting this all together, just seeing how well it handled just sprinting through nightmare dungeons. It really put a smile on my face, and still very much does. So, let's talk, well, affixes, stats, and your gems. Crit damage to vulnerable, that is easy enough, they're always vulnerable and we're always critting. Rubies for extra health, extra survivability is good, though you can do topazes if you die to being CC'd. Then we want extra armor in our rings. So, talking of actual stats, what we're looking for, what do we want on our gear, the number one biggest thing that is mandatory is lucky hit, chance to restore primary resource. You want it on your offhand, and then it comes on the gloves. These two, along with your passive Frigid Breeze, means that you have 3 separate lucky hit ways to get a big burst of mana. All 3 happening consistently is what gives you infinite mana, along with the other priorities of mana cost reduction, as that gets the actual raw amount of mana needed to fire the spell way down. Then you want extra maximum mana, like the 21 I have on my helmet, or the extra 12 on my ring, and then finally you want resource generation, like the 18% I have on my ring. That all combines together to give you infinite mana without needing, like, Prodigy's aspect, without needing to use Avalanche, and lets us play this Shatter playstyle. So yes, unfortunately, this is a build that does require you to get some fairly decent gear rolls, and obviously 2 uniques, though it really is worth it once you get there. Then once you've solved your mana issues, you want as much lucky hit as possible. That's why you have to use a wand on top of the extra attack speed that it gives. Then you want cooldown reduction so we can use all our defensives and Inferno as often as possible. Then you want ranks of defensive skills, and it would technically be ranks of Ice Shards, but we can't because we have unique gloves, and then ranks of Devouring Blaze on your amulet. Then you want crit chance, and then crit damage. After that, it is vulnerable damage, and then int, and your general damage increases, like close or far, and so on and so forth. Extra cold damage too, all of just the little extras you can get hold of. Then when we look at our actual stat thresholds, you want at least 30% crit chance, you want at least 30% attack speed bonus. I have the 6 naturally, and then accelerating brings me up to the rest. Then we want, quite simply, as much vulnerable damage as we can achieve, and then we go all the way down here to where it really matters. Mana generation, as high as you can, mana cost reduction, at least 30%, and then as high maximum mana as you can get. We want at least 30% cooldown reduction, and then we want at least 50% lucky hit chance with both of these combined. Now this obviously means that when I, for example, use teleport, I almost have a 100% roll at the mana regen, to use an example, which is really nice, but it also means I have a almost 100% roll at the 25% chance to freeze. So that's a 1 in 4 teleports will freeze the people I land on, which turns it into like an extra Frost Nova built in, which is so good. If I have a barrier up, it goes up to 106%. That is excellent. The Paragon board is all that remains then, and it really does a lot for this setup, so let's go through it. Follow on up and get to our first glyph slot. In here, you want to put Elementalist. The reason you want this is the pure non-physical damage nodes actually, from some testing, have one of the single biggest increases of your overall damage output that you can get your hands on. They're way more valuable than we initially thought, as, you know, the general sorcerer theory crafting community, so get this, get it amped, that is really nice. But more than that, we are doing both fire, cold, and lightning, teleport for lightning, fire from flamebolt, and obviously cold from ice shards, so this is an almost always 15% damage increase from the additional bonus. Then we head up and grab the burning board from Burning Instinct, and then we want to get this cluster here for the extra damage to burning enemies, get both the reduction and the extra damage to burning enemy clusters, and then in this we want vulnerable damage. Get it activated so we can stack up our overall damage, and you are good to move on to the Frigid Fate or Vulnerable board. If you do have extra points, if you're higher level than me, do grab Frigid Fate, as this will always be rolling, and just give you more chance to freeze, more chance to restore mana, all of that goodness. But the main deal here is this, the weakness node, along with Oppressive down here that you grab all around, but this weakness node, boosted by the Glyph of Choice Tactician, adds so much to your vulnerable damage, and therefore your overall damage. Then we go straight down, and this is the Elemental Summoner board. Yeah, this one is quite the awkward path, but it's one we must take. Orientate it like this, with the legendary straight below the gate, and then get this attack speed cluster so we can fire off even more ice shards. We don't care about, obviously, the conjuration damage, but the attack speed really is that good. Then we go straight down, branch to the right to grab all of the extra maximum mana. This helps out a lot. It's basically one extra free cast, and then we can go get the Glyph. And in that Glyph slot, we put Enchanter. Every 5 intelligence is more non-physical damage, and as we went over, that has a huge benefit. It multiplies up with your plus cold damage, your plus fire damage, in a really potent way. So that's the reason why we've got Conjurer here, just to start powering this up and work towards getting the bonus, though the bonus doesn't matter because resistances are broken, but just the more int you can get in range of this Glyph, the exponentially better. Then we move on through, grabbing another 10 int on the way to this cluster for another big chunk of pure non-physical damage. Then we go over into the Icefall board. So yeah, you really do need a lot of Paragon points, because getting to Icefall and getting that barrier survivability is what lets you use Iceheart Brais as your legs instead of a more normal tanky pair of legs with Disobedience on. It also powers all your barrier synergy constantly. So head straight down in this orientation, going through the extra cold damage nodes, which is a big increase to ice shards, and then head up and get it. After that, then, the extra points are kind of just nice, but not really needed. If you do go straight down here, get to the next Paragon board, well then, you will most likely go for the Enchantment Master, simply to get the extra % non-physical damage, but it's really not a huge increase. You could also go for Static Surge in order to get the maximum mana nodes, and to amp your damage after teleporting is a effective use of your points. Glyphs-wise, if you go and activate this socket, even though this isn't the most useful because we're not actually chilling enemies, we're just straight freezing them, but your next two glyphs that you would want to use are thus. Control is the next most important for just a big boost to damage to frozen enemies, and you can imagine how that helps with how this plays. And then finally, we want Destruction to increase the power of Ice Shards even more. So, that's sort of all there is to it then. A properly ranged, chain freezy way of ice sharding that, while it doesn't hit the crazy like billion trillions of damage that a more straightforward ice shard playstyle hits, it does operate in a way that's much safer and lets you play from ranged, and you get to have this blanket permanent screen-wide frozen that makes you just so in control of every dungeon you run through, and more importantly than that, will just auto-cleave through packs of enemies without you really having to do much. It's so good. Alright, I hope you have enjoyed this. Let me know if you're excited by it. Let me know if you're going to give it a go, and if you do, how you find it. And may you have good luck in getting any pieces of gear that you are missing to make this happen. Like you've enjoyed it, subscribe and hit the bell for more. Consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below. And until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.